Chris, to be honest, it put me in a bathtub. And so by 2 p.m. in the afternoon, I was spent. I was heading to the tub, and depression was just through the roof.
Welcome to Now That's It, Stories of MSP Success, where we dive into the journeys of some of the trailblazers in our industry to find out how they used their passion for technology to help turn managed services into the thriving sector it is today.
Ted Clouser, President and CEO of PCA Technology Solutions, a full-service technology firm headquartered in Little Rock, Arkansas. Welcome to the Now That's It podcast.
Thanks, Chris. I appreciate you having me.
You are very welcome. So as we were doing some research, I noticed that you have your own podcast. You've done a podcast for a number of years, and you have a really, really cool tagline, Go Win the Day.
Yes.
So can you tell us all about that?
Yeah, it's interesting, the story and the way that came about. So part of my journey over my business career is in 2018, after we purchased the company, not long after that, I went through a season of challenges. And during those challenges, I found myself in a state of depression. I really wasn't myself, and I had to work through that. And I remember part of the turning point, and this was like 14, 16 months in of the whole 18-month journey. And my wife looked at me and she said, listen, this has been a hard road, but I just want you to tell me, what is the worst that can happen? And so I said, well, I'm so glad you asked. This and this and this and this and this. And she said, wow, that would be really bad. What else? I said, well, then it would be this and this and this and this. And she said, oh, that would be awful. Then what? And I said, what do you mean then what? That's like as bad as it gets. And
Right.
she said, you're right. But now, if that's as bad as it gets, let's focus on digging out of this hole one day at a time. And so the Go Win the Day mantra was really as much for myself as it was to try to encourage others. So it was my technique of how I got out of that state one day at a time, the 1-0 mentality.
Fantastic. That's so good. I've gotten to know you over the last couple of years, and you truly live that mantra every single day. But as I found out when we were having some discussions about your life and your podcast and everything like that, it wasn't always like that. So we'll get to that part. We'll get to that point in your life. But why don't we start, young Ted back in rural Pennsylvania. You didn't grow up necessarily around computers. You had a different maybe path in your life at one point, right?
I did. I grew up on a dairy farm. I was the youngest of 3 boys. And the challenge that I faced is that I could not grow anything and I could not fix anything. So it wasn't long before my 2 older brothers decided that I needed to just hit the road. And so I started a journey to really determine where it was that I could find a purpose. And actually at a very young age, I had an interest in computers. There on the family farm, we had a computer. It was an old green screen, 8086. And
Wow.
so I would learn to tinker with it. And then in high school, I became sort of that resident computer person. I knew just enough. And I realized it was something that I felt like I could excel at. And so I liken my understanding computers a lot to a musician. I just got computers. It's like any musician that can pick up an instrument. I understood how they work. It's not necessarily my passion. My passions are in people, in business, in growth, in creating a sustainable organization. And technology just happens to be a really good platform for that.
Wow. That's great. Really neat. And I remember you said that you're 16 years old, right? You're really loving the computers. You see this as a way to maybe get away from the farm life.
Right.
And you decided to start your own company.
I did. So I actually graduated high school at 16. And I decided that from a business perspective, I felt like I could go to market with what it was that I thought I had created, which was just an idea, right? I didn't have inventory. I didn't have anything other than dreams. And so I began to really advertise in the local newspaper. I mean, you're talking about rural PA. In hindsight, rural PA has a lot of Amish. They do not have electricity. They do not have computers. So it wasn't the most sound business plan I ever had, but I did have several customers. I did make some sales, but it took about a year before I realized that I needed more opportunity. I needed more growth. And so at age 17, I joined a computer company up in State College, Pennsylvania. and was really just their break fix guy. I was sent out to replace modems, replace motherboards, replace CD-ROMs, things that I knew I could do. Somebody just had to teach me how to do it, and I was off.
Wow, that's great. So you're in PA, you're in state college, and by the way, as an Ohio State fan, I don't blame you for wanting to get out of there. But
This year,
but
baby, this
but
year.
but but you are still, yeah, you are still a diehard. We will let everybody know. But you decided to move away, right? You're going to move down to Arkansas. You're 18 years old, and you didn't have much, but you met the love of your life, I think you said.
I did. Yeah, absolutely. So I moved to Arkansas. I had a friend that lived here, but I just picked up. I mean, what I just needed a place, right? I could have easily
Yeah.
thrown a dart somewhere, but I think a greater power had me headed to Little Rock, where I ultimately met the love of my life. I
Awesome.
remember on our first date, it was a blind date, and I knew from the very beginning this was the girl I was going to marry. It took a few months for me to convince her of that, but finally, about 9 months in, we were married, and we're celebrating 25 years this year.
Congrats. That's
Thanks.
amazing, Ted. I've gotten to know Stephanie over the years, and she is definitely your better half. She keeps you honest, and I love her personality and everything she's done there at PCA as well. So fantastic.
Thanks.
Awesome. So when you go down to Arkansas, you had worked in IT. You actually owned a business for a period of time, a small one that being, but you would think you would have a ton of opportunity. Was that the case?
Not really. And so, part of it is I was an 18-year-old. I did not have any contacts. There was no opportunity. And so I just put my head down, got to work. I went to the Yellow Pages and so sent my resume, which wasn't that great, but it was at least had some experience. I sent it out to every computer company in the Yellow Pages. I was
Mhm.
interviewed by three and hired by one called PC Assistants. I was employee number 5 or 6 at the time. I'm not sure exactly what. The PC Assistants hired me in 1996, and fast forward to where we are today. That's now the company that my wife and I own, and we rebranded it to PCA Technology Solutions.
Awesome. That's so great. So yeah, I know you're a big faith guy, and there's definitely there was something about PC tech assistants reaching out to you, seeing that resume going, you know what? This is somebody that we should bring on board because we've got bigger plans for him. And I asked you that at the beginning, when you joined, did you ever think you'd be owning the company? I think the answer was no, but you always sort of took this attitude like, how could I do things better? Right, Ted? You're always looking at ways to just improve, constantly improve.
Absolutely. Part of it was I wanted to try to drive efficiencies. I didn't want to just do the same old thing. I wanted to see growth. I wanted to see success. And I believe that efficiency is a huge part of that. So my eyes were open to try to figure out how to do more with less. But I
Mhm.
also have a passion for the whole sales and growth and brand concept. I am a
Mhm.
CEO that believes strongly in the power of a brand, so much that my wife is our chief brand officer. And someday when she rides off into the sunset, we'll still continue to put a high priority on brand marketing because I believe it's essential.
You sure do, and we'll talk about that in a minute because I think the PCA brand is pretty powerful. I love the tagline you guys use as well, so I want to talk about that in a minute. So, how about this one? You're 5, I think you said you were employee 5 back in 1996 when you came on to PC Assistants. What was the company like with just 5 employees?
It was Ben Thomas was a founder and CEO at the time, and he had a desire to grow the company. It was something that he had just started with a credit card and a vision.
Mm.
And when I came in, one of the things that I immediately brought to the table was we had a partnership with a place called USNet, and
Mhm.
USNet serviced Packard Bell and Dell computers. And really, what they did is they brought work, which it didn't pay a lot, but it created opportunity. And so then I began to try to, as overseeing that, I tried to look for opportunity. When we went into a business or when I went into a business to try to replace a part, I asked them if there were other things that we could do for them. One of the things that we still talk about to this day is this sales mentality, right? We are always selling because selling is caring. And so if we're caring for the people that we're serving, ultimately it's not selling, it's order taking. And so over time, people began to call us because we were really good at caring. And I think that, what's interesting about our story is it wasn't until recently, and I'm talking about really in the past year or two, that we put a focused effort on sales, because historically we grew by referrals. In Little Rock, Arkansas, we had a very strong reputation and we had enough business coming in from referrals. And so now as we focused on that growth opportunity, we've really doubled down on saying, okay, how do we scale? How do we evolve? But it's still the same concept, which is a challenge, right? Anytime you grow, to try to make those processes repeatable and to have that experience feel the same as it did 20 some years ago, it's a challenge, but it's something we're very committed to.
That's great that you still remember that and obviously have continued to drive that in the company. I think there's a lot of MSPs that grow very, very quickly and maybe they forget some of those things that were such a focus or such a key back when they were smaller that really helped them get to that point.
Mhm.
That being like, so you guys grew pretty quickly over the next, 5 or so years. I think you got above 20 people and you yourself grew, right, Ted? I think you had mentioned like you became EVP. And so that doesn't surprise me, by the way, now that I got to know you over the last couple of years. But why do you think they were able to put you in a position or to offer that role to you at such a young age?
Obviously, as a man of faith, I've got to ultimately say that it was God's hand that put me there. But I was not afraid to work. One of the
Hmm.
things that I will say dairy farming taught me is that I'd get up early, and I was starting my days at 5 a.m. And back in early 2000s, that was a huge advantage because I could get 4 or 5 or maybe 6 hours worth of work done in a 2 hour time span
Well,
because no distractions existed. And so I wasn't afraid to do that. I was willing to go the extra mile. I worked long hours. Even as I was growing a family, Steph was extremely supportive to give me opportunity to work. But then we have that mantra of work hard, play hard, right? So we vacationed a lot. By the time I was 30 years old, we had seen all 50 states in the US. So it
oh,
wasn't in spite of, it was in addition to. One of the things that really spiked our growth in the early 2000s was we had sparked a relationship with a place called Altel, which ultimately was sold to Verizon. And we were the first in Arkansas to roll out the DSL modems. So
mm.
every time Altel sold DSL, they called PC Assistance. And so it grew our business. I mean, I think we doubled in just a matter of 2 or 3 years.
Wow. I was just gonna ask that. That's fantastic. So what an amazing partnership early on to help you grow that business and way to keep it going, keep continuing to grow it. That's amazing. So you were a business owner at 16. So I'm guessing that, as you're back in the tech side or even as you take over the EVP side, you're probably aspiring to move back into a role to call the shots at some point in time. And so can you talk a little bit about how the ownership opportunity came at PCA came about?
Yeah, I actually can tell you, I never desired to own again. I was very comfortable being the number two guy. I felt
Mhm.
like I thrived in it. It allowed me to take all of the best qualities that I felt like I was gifted with and use them. Stephanie always felt like I could someday own the company. It's not that I couldn't, it's that I just simply didn't want to.
Mhm.
And, the owner and I, or the founder, had conversations. There was always the expectation or plan of that. I just didn't feel like it was going to come. And so it all happened pretty quickly when he had conversations about the exit strategy. Steph and I had prayed about it. And quite honestly, I can say in hindsight, I can, without beyond a shadow of a doubt, I was supposed to buy the company. I mean, I can say
Wow.
that wholeheartedly
Yeah.
because God made it happen. But it's not for the reasons that I thought. I had a lot of counsel. I had a lot of people that were speaking into me to say, you need to understand that this transition is more than you think. And I'm like, I got it. I've been running the company. It's not that hard. I've
Yep.
already acted like I was the owner. I've treated
Yep.
everybody like I was the owner. This will not be hard. And boy, was it hard. And it ended up putting me in a state of rebuilding. And the reason why I can say so confidently that I was supposed to buy it is I'm a much better man and a person than I was beforehand. And it was really through that process that allowed me to see a lot of my blind spots.
Yeah, so when you told us your story a few weeks back, it actually wasn't surprising. There is a point in time when that we hear from a bunch of MSPs or a bunch of business owners that after they make a big purchase or they become the owner, It's like a 6 month, 8 month, 9 month, maybe 12 months where they have a pretty quick realization. And yours was pretty drastic, right? You mentioned it at the beginning. Can you talk a little bit about just sort of what that felt like? What was happening in your brain, and maybe where the sort of depression spark, like where it came from?
Yeah, I'm happy to. And I'm a big advocate of being open and real about this because, even if I could just help one person recognize they're not alone, recognize that this is not something that you should shy away from or be ashamed of, then it's worth it. So we bought the business in 2018. About 6 months later, I brought in a business consultant and we really started working through the challenges that I had started to face 6 months in. And it didn't take him long to see and really push me and say, Ted, you've created a company with no foundation. You built all of this and you were the fixer. People would come to you and ask for direction, and you were good at pointing them in the direction and then they'd head off. But you've essentially got a company that isn't worth much. That, I went millions of dollars in debt in a building because we decided that was a smart idea to buy a new building too. The
Sure.
company, I turned 40. Been married 20 years. My daughter went off to college. I had all of these life changes. And, Chris, to be honest, it put me in a bathtub. And so by 2 p.m. in the afternoon, I was spent. I was heading to the tub, and depression was just through the roof. And, you know, thankfully, our COO, Rex Easter, Steph, as the chief brand officer, and our business consultant really rose up to help begin to build the things. I was able to function at least, 50%, but I wasn't my whole self. I was struggling on every level. And so it was hopeless. And the best way I can describe it, and the reason, again, the whole go win the day mantra was so powerful for me is I was literally anxious about things that might happen a year and a half in the future, a year and a half in the
Wow.
future, right? And so that is an impossible thing to overcome if I'm anxious that far in the future. It's one thing to be anxious about a meeting I have tonight or even tomorrow, but that was so daunting and so overwhelming. And so part of the journey was recognizing it. I certainly was open about talking to a professional counselor, being open to medication, really just praying through what that looked like, and ultimately came to a spot where, as I shared earlier with that story with Stephanie, that was beginning to come out of it. But as I was coming out, so 18 months into the process, COVID happened. And again, in hindsight, I can walk through all of these, right? So Psalm 23, I was walking through a valley, but it was preparing me for what was to come. And what was interesting about COVID is I felt like it was a level playing ground again. I had struggled for the past 18 months thinking everybody's better than me. All the other IT firms are better. Every CEO is better. And when that happened, I was able, again, I was coming out of it. So that was important, but I was able to look and think, we're all even again. And so I was able to then begin to lead through something that nobody was an expert in. And it was really life changing for me. We were fortunate to be able to get through the pandemic. Arkansas was handled it pretty well. So it was business as usual for the most part. But we, sent people home and did some of those things. But it was a really, really just a pivotal point for me and for the leadership and the company as a whole.
I'm so glad that you were able to get the help that you needed and that you had the people around you like Steph and Rex. And
Mhm.
it sounds to me like there were a bunch more as well
Absolutely.
that stuck by you. And it's so great that obviously this awful thing like COVID happened, but it gave you an opportunity to say, I got to snap out of this. Obviously, you were already well on your way, but it's given me a chance to sort of start fresh and build a new company the way that I want to build it, right? And I just think that is it's the Ted that I know, right? And I've gotten to know you in the last couple of years. You've always been this just very optimistic, positive person. To see that there was this part of your life that wasn't that way, it's amazing. I think that's just a testament to what you've become and the company that you've built. You guys have a fantastic MSP. You've got a great group. I love Rex. I love Stephanie. They've done such an amazing job there. Your brand is really powerful. So I congrats on being able to work through everything that you did and continuing to build the company out of COVID. I mean, that's just really amazing.
Well, I appreciate that. And,
Yeah.
part of our mission, part of our vision, part of our core values big part of that is partnership. And so I'm
Sure.
grateful for organizations like Enable that have been with us through so many of these challenges, that we're able to provide us with what we need to grow. Been a partner for a long time, and we have huge plans for the next decade. And so I look forward to really spearheading forward those types of partnerships.
That's awesome. Do you remember about when you were introduced to Enable? When the connection did you see it? Was it Rex? How did you get introduced to Enable?
Yeah, so we were probably the second or third in the state of Arkansas to really begin to spearhead into the MSP side full circle. So I just used Google. It was
Mhm.
2004, maybe 2005 that we began the journey. And Enable was just white gloving us through the process. It was a great experience. Good friend Gavin was the CEO at the time that I got to know later over those years. But it
Mhm.
was just a top-notch product, but it was an enormous expense for us. I mean, we were a
Sure.
small company preparing with this vision that, quite honestly, Stephanie and I had talked through, and I came up on a car ride home back to Pennsylvania of what we were going to do. We were going to call it IT Assurance, and we've since rebranded it to be just ITA, to really make it more simplistic. But that was just from one of those trips where, you know, I think it's important. You've heard a lot of working on the business instead of in the business. And car rides and time out in wilderness just gives me some freedom to really begin to be creative and to think of ideas. And so when we came back with that, this is all just, I think it will work. And so now I'm trying to make a business decision that we're going to spend this enormous amount of money. And gosh, it was one of the greatest investments we've ever made in the history of the company. But it
Yeah.
was it was pretty scary to think about back then.
We appreciate your partnership, Ted. And we got to know each other. I think it was early last year. You and Stephanie had joined what was again one of our inaugural business transformation programs. What sparked your interest in coming to Raleigh and being part of a program like that?
You know, I don't know the answer to that question, but I
Yeah.
can tell you I know myself well enough. It's
Yeah.
probably that I was asked.
Yeah. Yeah.
And again, it goes back to partnerships, right? And
Hmm.
so if someone that I have a very good relationship with, Enable, asks me to do something, hey, I better have a good reason not to do it. And so
That's
I'm pretty sure that's the way it was. Just like with all of our vendor relationships, if part of a partnership is to be willing to do those things. And honestly, not only was that fruitful, not only was it a great collaboration and information giving, that group is tight knit. I mean, we
yeah.
still communicate pretty regularly to this day, and that in itself is huge to have that type of peer relationship across the United States. So I'm
Yeah.
grateful for that.
We use you as an example, Ted, you and the rest of that group. We said, we've got folks that love chatting with each other from these programs. But this first group that we had, they actually created like a Slack channel and
Right.
they continue to communicate outside with each other. Hey, I've got this question on making this change to our business. And you've essentially created your own peer group amongst yourselves, which is really, really great.
Yeah, I know. And you
Yeah.
guys were part of making that happen. So I'm glad I
Oh,
could.
that's awesome. That's awesome. So let's talk a little bit about some of the other changes that you guys made. I know, EOS is definitely
Mhm.
a organizational change that a lot of small businesses try to turn themselves into or look at. But I've seen it really be a focus for MSPs. And so, can you talk a little bit about the importance of EOS and just why you went down that path?
Well, our current business consultant advised me to read Traction. This was also the guy that advised me there was more opportunity on the table with ERTC credits. Of course, you hear about all that now, right? They're knocking on the doors, but this was
Yep.
early on. So I felt, okay, if he told me about that, this Traction thing ought to be pretty good. And I read it, and I'm just sitting here thinking, oh my goodness, this is so easy. How am I not running this already? And so he told me to read it in December. I brought it to my executive team in January and really pitched it and said, I think this can revolutionize our business. And, I've been known to bring what we call shiny stuff in that's going to revolutionize our business.
Sure.
Kind of what CEOs do a lot. But I was pretty convinced that this was the final silver bullet that really could change things. And so we rolled it out. We actually did all self implementation, but rolled it out on the executive level. And that was January. I think we made a commitment to have it, rolled out in February or whatever. And we were seeing so much traction really pretty quickly because meetings, well, I mean, meetings can just be a waste of time. It can be,
Sure.
they're just totally unproductive, right? And traction, reading that will tell you that. But this is different. It's very laser focused. And what's interesting, because we rolled it out in the entire company in June, and so we're almost 60 some days into it. What's interesting is we had a year-end retreat at Big Cedar Lodge last year. Took the entire company, shut down our MSSP, and partnered with another group to handle our tickets for that 24, 48-hour period. And one of the final sessions that I really stressed was called Measure Twice, Cut Once. And it was all about metrics. And I walked out there thinking, whoa, this is going to be great. I have no clue how I'm going to do what I just said I need to do. But within 30 days, and I read traction and I start thinking about what they call a scoreboard. And we're your technology coach. So we try to be very sports based. So ours are a stat sheet. So I began to see how I could take these KPIs and make them visual and tie metrics around them, tie just the number so that everybody has a number which traction focuses on. And Chris, I'm telling you, I am floored in 8 months what we have seen happen.
Yep.
Absolutely floored with issues that we have resolved that have sat around for years. And the
Mhm.
things that we're focusing on this quarter and we're about to focus on next quarter, we were just spinning. And again, traction talks about the whole concept is to fix issues, not try to suppress them, not band-aid them, to fix them. And it's been huge for us, Chris. I'd strongly recommend it. It's interesting. I don't know how scalable it is, but I thought, if the US government would just sit and have some level 10 meetings, maybe they'd fix some problems.
That's great. That's great. Very good. Yeah, it's you know what? Traction's one of those things that it's such a powerful book. EOS is such a powerful, technique that we had an in-person peer group a few weeks ago. Several of the gentlemen that are businesses that are in there. And we had sort of a CEO hot seat was one of the sections in the in-person peer group. And the CEO got up there and he was sort of talking about, I'm having all these sort of operational challenges and I don't know like what my role as a CEO is and so on and so forth. And then very quickly, one of the members of the peer group said, "You need EOS." And he walked out of the room and he grabbed both of the books, the Cliff Notes and the Full Traction book, and handed it to him and said, "Read this on the way back." And he's like, "How did you have this?" He goes, "We give it to every one of our employees." And so it was just one of those things that was just been really, really powerful. And I've heard somebody speak very highly of. So very, very good. I really appreciate your story on that. So let's talk a little bit about the PCA brand. I have really been able to see the power of social media that you post every single day. I think your website is one of the, best websites. I love the idea. I almost say it's like transparency. Like you share on your website, like this is who we are, this is what we do. Do you want an example, like based upon the type of company you are? You just have done such a nice job of putting so much focus in the brand and what PCA is. Can you talk a little bit about the importance of branding?
I mean, I'll give it a try.
Yeah.
My chief brand officer and marketing team really ought to speak to it. In fact, I can't remember if I shared. I just learned apparently we have a font, and so now I'm writing letters and then that font. I mean, I'm taking it to a new level. If
Yep.
I'm not using that font, I'm gonna be busted. But to me,
Yeah.
it's just the message, right? So the importance of the brand is that we want every single person, we want every piece of social media and everything that goes out to be consistent. And so we have our terminology, and we're actually going through that as a company right now, revisiting because unfortunately, the stuff gets stagnant, right? And so when we rebranded, it was the end of 2018. That's coming up on 5 years ago. And so
Right.
now we're really analyzing and saying, okay, does everything still fit? Do we need to look at adapting? And I think that one of the things that I've learned, because I tend to be that, you know, shoot from the hip type guy, I've learned that I need to engage my brand and marketing team before I put it out because it can cause confusion. It can cause the wrong message. And so the consistency in all that we do, from the words that we use, that's why I mentioned IT assurance and we're rebranding it to ITA. It's because 95% of the people in the organization say ITA. So we need to get that to 100. We need to sunset the old term and we need to be consistent. So even just down to that level, the importance of the words that we use, both internal and external, are essential. And one of the things that we're pretty focused on with even our social media is the importance of that consistency, because you're seeing what PCA means, and that's our best way to do it, is that consistency.
Yeah, I think it's amazing. Even on your personal posts, even if you're sharing something that you went to with your family or your friends or you're on vacation, you still are very, very consistent with it. And I almost look forward to it. Like, hey,
I
when's
appreciate
Ted's post going to be? So great job with that. That is not an easy thing. So congrats on that. The other thing I love about you, Ted, is you like to think outside the box. I'm not sure how much you're willing to go into detail on this,
Sure.
but when we met in Raleigh last year, you were trying to convince Robert and I about this marketing idea you had. And so I was curious if you'd like to share your out of the box thinking and maybe how that went over the last couple of years.
Yeah. Well, so our one of our things that we focused on is this sports mentality. It's interesting because we are your technology coach, and we've had a
Yes.
lot of internal discussions, because when I think coach, I think Nick Saban. And
Mm,
so whether you love him or hate him, he wins. Why does he win? Because he brings in a plan. And so if you hire us as your technology coach, we're coming in with a plan that will allow your business to win. The downside is not everybody sees the word coach that way. So that's something we're having to evaluate. But because we are your technology coach and because it's the sports analogy, I thought it would be a great idea to sign an NIL deal. You saw banks, at least in Arkansas, we had financial institutions that were doing it. You had large organizations that were doing it. No small business like ours was doing it. So perfect opportunity, we felt like. And so we began to put together a strategy. I'm not sure the team was as bought into it as I was. It's another one of
yep.
the Ted shiny things, right? But I kept pushing. I kept really spearheading it. I had the conversations, and we're fortunate enough. My son was an athlete, so I had some connections, and we did an NIL deal with a young man that I just think is so amazing, named Darian Ford. He was at the University of Arkansas at the time when we signed him. And part of what we wanted to do with the NIL agreement is great IT are our core values. We needed the NIL relationship to be the same. They needed to meet all of our core values, because signing an NIL deal, and I have learned a lot, right? And I realized
Right.
there's NIL attorneys. I had to hire an NIL attorney to draft contracts, but it was a learning experience, and it allowed us to really, again, spearhead. And I felt like in a very safe way. I'm a calculated risk guy. I do not mind taking risks, but I'd like to know that there's a really good chance they're going to be successful. And I felt like this was. And so, we set up the arrangement and then had the event in June, and it was, oh my gosh, it far surpassed my expectations. We made it about the community. We opened up doors. We had it at local venue. We allowed it to be free. We invited the community. We pushed it and pushed it. And I just remember Darian and his family. There's one more plot twist that I'll throw in, but I just
Yeah.
remember the smiles in their face and how they felt looking at all these people that came out to see their son. And I
Wow.
remember talking to Darian and his family and said, these are kids dream to be like Darian, right?
Right.
They aspire to be like him. And Darian, also part of it is you'll see some things coming out soon where he's a part of our coaching videos where he talks about the importance of a coach. And so very excited about how it all turned out. The plot twist was about a month before the event, he entered the portal. And I'm like, oh no,
The transfer portal. Yeah.
if
Yeah.
he goes to somebody that's anti-Arkansas, this is not going to
Yeah.
be good. But it
Right.
ended up being perfect. He transferred to Arkansas State. It was a total win. And the thing about NIL is the relationship is with the student. It's not
Right.
you have to adhere to the rules of the school, but it's with the student. And so, people would ask if, now that he's in the portal, are you still, yeah, no, our relationship with
Yeah.
Darian, and we're committed to that. And even had the conversation, super amazing kid. And he called me beforehand to say, hey, I just need to give you a heads up. I do not want you to read this on Twitter. I don't want you to read in the paper. but I'm going to be in a portal. And I just don't know what that means for us. I can say, I'll tell you what it means for us. We're still in this together. So,
That's great.
and it was
That's
great. I mean, it was a really, really good experience.
good. That's great that it worked out the way that it that you had hoped it would, and sounds like even better. But also for those of you out there listening, not don't be afraid to think outside the box once in a while, because it sounds to me like something that was, maybe a little risky but calculated, ended up not only working out for you from a lead generation perspective, but it was also really enjoyable and it felt very rewarding because again, you're giving back to the community, you're giving back to this player, this young teen and his family. I mean, just that's really, really great, Ted. And that falls in line with the Ted that I got to know really, really well. So that's great. I love that story, and I think that's a great one. I really appreciate you sharing that.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Awesome. So talk to us about what the future holds for PCA and maybe yourself.
Well, I mean, the future for PCI, I think, means growth. And so
Mm-hmm.
we have one of the things that we're very proud of is the new foundation that was built. And as I talked through that story and I transitioned, we've rallied the team and we've made sure the right people are in the right seats doing the right things. That's another traction comment. Again, Nick
Mm-hmm.
Saban talks about it a little different, but the same concept, right? We don't want A, B, and C players. We want all A players. And so as we hire and ultimately as we fire at PCA, it is all around core values. We want to make sure that we have like-minded people within our organization. We can teach the IT part of it much easier than we can those core values. So we're going to continue to hire around that. We just had a new person start this week. We're over 30 people, continue to have growth plans to really evolve. And quite honestly, I think, we gave it a whirl before COVID, right before COVID, when we opened some additional offices. I'm actually in my North Rock location today. It's a lot quieter over here, but I fully foresee us entering into other markets in the very near future. In fact, I know there's a study being done right now of what makes sense because as we continue to grow and evolve, yes, Arkansas is our home and we're going to take care of the people that got us to where we are. But we believe that there's more opportunity throughout the US that we can really be a part of. And so we're excited about that. I'll also share that I don't know if you saw my post. What was it today? Yeah, today. So there's a new alter ego of mine, AI Ted, that we're playing with a little bit. So you'll see a little bit more of him. So that's in the near future.
We'll see if your readers like AI Ted better than actual Ted, right? That's the fear of the future, right?
Right.
We'll
That's
see.
exactly
Yeah,
right.
that's good.
Yeah. So
Wh-
go ahead.
Excellent. That's very exciting, Ted. I look forward to seeing the growth and how you guys evolve.
Thank
All
you.
right. So as is tradition, since this is the Now That's It podcast, we like to ask all of our guests one final question. Um, when did you know that was it, Ted? That either you had done the right thing, made the right decision. When did you know that was it?
Wow. I mean, I've got to point it back to Steph. When I asked her to marry me, I mean, my life has never been the same. She is definitely my better half. She pushes me, encourages me, and so I've got to say that's when I knew it was it.
That's great. That's great, Ted. You know what? I really, really, really appreciate the conversation today. It's always great catching up with you. I wish you, Rex, and Stephanie the best, as well as the rest of the PCA team for the future. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, Chris. I appreciate it.